coming back to your work specifically, then I think one of the ideas I picked up from one of your recent book, What Do You Want Out of Life, is the idea of conflicting goals and how that sometimes will stop us because people will wonder whether they're on the right path, whether they what their goal is chasing is actually worthy. I guess my question was, how does that happen? How do people find themselves in a place where their goals are conflicted?
Yeah, I mean, I think the the basic human condition is we're always going to have some conflicting goal, not just goals, but conflicting values. And it's because we have limited time and limited resources. Um, I think this is something I learned from reading psychology, but there's kind of a conflict built into human nature. So we evolved to be curious about the external world and to want to push ourselves forward. And we also evolved to want to be safe and to avoid predators and putting ourselves out there where we can get killed by something. So there's always a kind of push me, pull you in terms of like, oh, exciting new thing. Let's go for it. No, let's stay back here in the cave. So, you know, at the very least, we have that kind of conflict. So I don't think eliminating conflicts is the right way to think about it. I think we have to think about managing the conflicts and trying to reduce their burden. I don't know if this is true for your generation at this point, but the kind of the conflict that everybody talks about is work-life balance. Is that a familiar thing still?
Yeah, it's very familiar. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So that's a conflict, but that's not a conflict you're gonna eliminate. It's like, well, until you retire, maybe, and then possibly you eliminate that conflict. But you also don't want to, you're not going to give up one of those things. You're not going to be like, okay, well, I just won't work and I'll stay home with my family. Some people can do that, but it's not common anymore. You're not going to say, okay, I'm not going to ever have any friends or get married or have children because I have to work. You have to find ways of fitting them together. And that can mean, changing the standards that you have for work, what counts as making a contribution to work or being successful. It could mean changing your ideas about family. Maybe if you want to work, you can't also be a stay-at-home parent. So you have to kind of negotiate with your values and sort of ask yourself, well, how can I interpret these things so they fit together? I mean, it's easier said than done, but I think like in the abstract, that's the process.
I would like to really stay on that topic because I think it's a very salient topic for my audience. That you mentioned, that it's very hard to kind of get rid of these conflicts, but you can manage them. What are some other ways someone can manage these conflicts? First, maybe talk about how they can recognize there is a conflict. What are some of the signs that, like your life, there is actually a conflict of values, and also what are some other ways they can manage that conflict?
I mean, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead in your questions, but one of the strategies I talk about for identifying your values is I call it the lab rat strategy. And the thought is to think of yourself, to try to take a third person perspective on yourself. So think of yourself as a rat in a lab that the other you, the reflective you, is examining, observing, and studying. And pay attention in particular to not what the rat is thinking, because in this thought experiment, you don't know what the rat's thinking because you're outside to the rat. But look at what the rat is doing, look at the rat's behavior, try to see what's the physical evidence of how the rat feels. I think so moving back to the human case where you're just imagining yourself at a distance, there's a lot of things we can tell by paying attention to our own behavior and to what our emotions are doing. Um, Frequently, pe stress and conflict show up in gastric distress, trouble sleeping, spikes of anxiety, panic attacks, um, different people have different symptoms, but they're often physical symptoms. And a lot of people, once you get to your 30s or 40s, you start to recognize the patterns that when life is going wrong in these ways, I'm going to get migraines, or I'm going to get stomach upset, or but if you can take a reflective moment and think, okay, when am I actually getting those bad physical symptoms? Because that's a sign that something is going wrong. You don't just have to focus on the negative, you can also look like at when the rat seems happy. So you can think about the past week and think, when was I actually my most happy? Like, when did I laugh in the past week? What was I doing when I had that moment of joyfulness? So that strategy, I think, lets us perceive something about our nature that if all we do is think and talk to ourselves or journal and write to ourselves, we can miss that stuff because our rational brains have lots of storytelling capacity. We like to make things up and say, "Oh, I know what Valerie's like. She's like this. She likes these things. She likes these things she's been doing." Even though, every time I do those things, I cry, but the rational brain doesn't want to hear that because the rational brain is all committed to doing that stuff. So this lab rat strategy is partly meant to kind of bypass that storyteller brain, the one that is rationalizing all the time, and to get at some of those emotional and physical parts of who we are that also need to fit with our values. So finally, getting back to your question about conflict, I think that that same strategy can help with conflict, because conflict also shows up in stress and other physical symptoms. So you can apply that same strategy, and what conclusion you draw from it is the relevant point here. When you think about your data, you've looked at yourself and when does he smile? When does he frown? What's going on? How many headaches? When do they start? Then you've got all your data. And when you think about it, then you have to do some reflective work of thinking, well, am I doing something that isn't good for me? Or am I trying to deal with a conflict that's just too much? And I need to make a change to reduce the pressure of these two things against each other. That's really something you have to figure out for yourself on a case-by-case basis. But I do think that strategy, taking a second person standpoint, can help.
I think also another way of that I've learned about how to kind of like navigate that conflict is a term you call bittersweet release of goals. So, what is the bittersweet release of goals? Can you kind of describe what it's like for someone to go through that?
Oh, good. So that's a kind of case where I think sometimes you do have to give something up. So I was talking before about how, often you can't give something up, and you have to try to manage the conflict. But sometimes it does make sense. Sometimes you realize, I've been beating my head against this wall for a year. Every time you know, let's say you're trying to learn a musical instrument. Every time I pick up this guitar, I feel like throwing it across the room. I want to cry. And I go back to it and there's no joy in it for me. You might just have to give it up. And, sometimes that makes sense. There's some cases where giving something up, you can realize that that specific thing you were doing, so just to keep with the music example for a second, because it just simplifies things, okay, maybe the guitar wasn't for you, but could you find another way to be artistic? Like maybe the real goal was to be creative. You wanted to do something artsy. And could you find something else? That's one possibility. But another possibility is you just say, I I love music. I would love to be able to make music. I'm not good at it. I'm just going to have to let that go. the letting go, when you mentioned that phrase, the bittersweet loss. Um, it's not always so. The person who gave me that phrase about the bittersweet loss is someone who's retired. So it's bittersweet for her because she's kind of at the end of having accomplished a ton in her life. For a lot of us who are not retired, it's more bitter than sweet to give something up. And that process to, I think the having to give something up is a lot like grief. It's obviously it's not as terrible as losing a loved person, but to have to give something up that you did love to do or that you really thought was important for you to do, it feels bad. And just like grief, you have to find your own way through it. And it might always be something that's a little bit has a touch of sadness for you.
Mm,
I guess the sweetness, even for younger people, might be that you finally came to terms with it and you've made your peace in a way. You've said, okay, this is I decided this, and this I can at least be glad that I don't have to have all those moments of struggle with this thing that I was trying to do that I'm terrible at.
I think we've talked a lot about value and like, what it means when people have value and, but I'd like to come up, to a little bit more about my audience now, talking about the influence of culture and technology on what we value. I feel like a lot of the time we're told what to value, and that comes from all the information that we receive through social media or through being told by people older than us. What are some of the ways that people in my generation, like, what's some of the ways they can understand how culture and technology can impact what they value?